testimony, I want to hit on the state made a big point in telling you that the robbery of Calvin Johnson occurred on May the 31st. Why? It has to be May the 31st because we've got a June 1st photograph of marijuana at Melvin Vernell's house, in his cell phone on the 1st. So it had to have happened before the 1st. Okay? So they had to make something fit there. But let me tell you what, and please check your notes, DeSensei White said. He said that when we were robbed, I got with Calvin Johnson, and then I met with Eldorado Red that day, or the next day, Red, Calvin, and me met up at Calvin's house. That's impossible if the robbery occurred on May the 31st, because the cell phone records from May the 31st through June the 5th of 2012 demonstrate irrefutably that Gary Bradford was in California the entire time. So if it happened on the 31st, they couldn't have met that day. They couldn't have met the next day if the robbery ever occurred. If the robbery ever occurred. Let me, Mr. Banks argued to you that by the end of this run in June of 2012, Gary Bradford was DeSensei White's only weed customer. Really? Why do you have 7 to 10 apartments to store weed and money, which was the testimony of DeSensei White, if in fact your only customer is Gary Bradford, if he was his customer, and Calvin Johnson's job, according to White and Johnson, was to go and pick the stuff up at FedEx and transport it himself, and DeSensei White said, I never saw it and I never touched it. What do you have 7 to 10 apartments for? Mr. Banks just said it 2 hours ago. Because DeSensei White is a player. He's a player in the drug business, and you don't have 7 to 10 apartments unless it's full of, and this is just a reasonable inference, weed, money, cocaine, and other drugs coming from California for distribution here. And I think his testimony was that it was in 2006, the summer before the first season he went to school at Texas Tech, that he went there in the summer before. That's when he discovered the weed. He really didn't make it on the basketball team, although he could have. He had the talent. He didn't have the heart. He'd rather get high and make money. And he started selling. Now, Mr. Banks just said $50,000 to $70,000 a month. Okay, you do the math. 12 times 50,000, 40,000. How much money is that a month? How much? How much is it a year? And the testimony was from Manny Chapayev to the FBI agent that he had already saved 2 summers worth of dough. He had all the money in the world. He was robbed, and he didn't like it. His people were robbed, not Gary Bradford's. And DeSensei White wanted him dead, wanted him hurt. And here's another thing. Mr. Banks said to you, well, they called up Connor and Washington and had him come in because they were going to kill him. No, I don't think so. DeSensei White said, hey, and those calls, according to Mr. Banks, were on May the 31st. Well, according to DeSensei White, we didn't know what we were going to do. We were going to all get together and sit down and talk and decide whether or not we should go talk to him, maybe talk to his dad, or go to his house and rob it, burglarize it. You know, there were so many options. Death never even came up until the end when you do it mob style. How many of those gang movies do you have to watch to see mob style set? If you want to kill somebody like the mob, you use a .22 caliber pistol behind the ear and the bullet rattles around in your brain and kills them. That's the mob. That's New York. That's Godfather stuff. But even so, even if the plan eventually became let's kill him, there wouldn't be any pulsating veins because they didn't know what was going to happen when they were going there, even if the story was true. They've got the burden of proof. They have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Gary Bradford did the things they said he did. And let me tell you something. You've heard the phrase, the guilt or innocence of the defendant, correct? It's really not an issue in a criminal trial, except that the accused is presumed innocent. The only jury verdicts in this country are guilty and not guilty. Okay? In Europe, there's a third option that falls under not guilty in this country, and that's not proven. So if Gary Bradford is innocent, and I think that presumption remains with him, particularly in the face of the evidence they're trying to sell to you, he's not guilty on the verdict form. If they haven't proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty, he's not guilty also. And I'm saying to you that either way, if you even listen to the evidence that they're saying, there's no credibility to their witnesses. And other than that, you have circumstantial evidence and inferences that Mr. Banks is encouraging you to draw. Inferences. And let me tell you this about circumstantial evidence, and the judge will tell you if a case is based on circumstantial evidence alone, then you may not convict unless the circumstantial evidence eliminates every reasonable hypothesis except for the guilt of the accused. The judge will tell you that. So if you don't believe DeSensei White because he is incredible, and if you don't believe Calvin Johnson, who are the only two people who have offered any evidence against Gary Bradford, you must acquit. The form of your verdict has to be not guilty because it doesn't eliminate any other reasonable hypothesis. What other hypothesis? Mr. Banks gave it to you. He told you Manny wanted this guy dead worse than anybody. First of all, you heard the testimony on cross-examination, I think by Attorney Shard, when J.T. Williams said, yeah, Manny Chapayev did not like Melvin Vernell. Didn't like him. Thought he was a punk, thought he was disrespectful, and he messed up his cars. That's one thing. But he got stopped in one of his vehicles, and he owned, according to J.T. Williams, 144 vehicles. And the one that we know about, the one that's been investigated, although you saw they took all of the files from his office, the one they investigated had so many owners around the country, it was tough to tell who owned the car. But what did Manny Chapayev do? Obviously, he would steal cars, wash the VINs so he didn't have to buy them or pay for them. They're high-end cars. And then he rents them out for $5,000 or $10,000 down and $1,500, $2,500 a week. And he was making a fortune. And if you don't believe me, look at the records that we admitted that they seized from his shop. And I think you will see that from October to March of 2013, there were $2,040,000 in deposits into this account. And Manny Chapayev had the nerve to take out $2,090,000. He overdrew the account by $42,000. And that's just in a very short period of time. And was all of this in jeopardy? You bet it was, because Melvin Vernell was innocent of receiving stolen property. And you know that if he had gone to trial, had he had someone's lawyer other than Manny Chapayev's lawyer, he would have told him, look, I got this car from Manny Chapayev. I don't know anything about this. You ought to look into him. And the district attorney came in here, and we've tendered a memorandum that went around the DA's office saying that. There's a problem. We ought to look into the whole business. But I think Ms. Ross called him a baby lawyer because he was just in the business for a very short period of time, but he was smart enough to notice that he wasn't going to go with a word-perfect contract and proof of ownership. And if Melvin Vernell had testified, then there would have been that investigation in the complex division. That's this division, not the non-complex division where they were offering him PTI, and his whole empire would have gone down. I'm talking about $2,090,000 in August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, divided by 8. 2 million divided by 8, multiply it out for a year, and how long had he been in business, and what did he and Grizz want to do? Stay in business. I'm going to open up a franchise with you, Grizz. This guy's got to be dead, or we're out of business. And you'll see when you look at the search of the business, there's Manny Chapayev's gun, Defendant Bradford's 23. His gun is screwed to the bottom of his desk, just in case there was any trouble with regard to the people that he was dealing with. You shoot him, you kill him, you put him in a car, and you get rid of him, and then blame somebody else. That's Manny Chapayev style, and he was with the Russian mafia in New York. The only reason he was on the street at the time was he agreed to turn on them, and he had turned on Grizz the day after the murder when he contacted Dante Jackson. And Dante Jackson covered it. Manny Chapayev wanted him dead. Mr. Banks inquired as to how might they have known where Calvin Johnson's car was. Well, are you kidding me? How did they know where Melvin Vernell's car was? Trackers. You track the car. It's nonsense to believe. You know, he came in here and testified that he got up this morning and spoke to somebody on the phone, go to TV, and I told him where I was going. Really? When you were interviewed 2 weeks before by J.T. Williams in Los Angeles in a car passing gas and licking your lips, you said, yeah, I talked to him on the way, but I never tell anybody what I'm doing and where I'm going. Which is it? Which is it? He also told him that his feet hit the ground that morning in Marietta, Georgia, not Armour Drive. I live in Armour Drive. I live at the Capitol. I live at the White House. Where's the lease? Where's some proof who lives where? He told him in the recording that he lived in Marietta. His feet hit the ground. He took off to make a delivery. First, he picked up the drugs. He stopped on Metropolitan to get some gas, and boom, someone robbed him. And what's the big link in this whole thing? An Escalade. Anybody know how many Escalades you've seen in the metro Atlanta area? And what was the next link? They had a gun with an extended clip. There's been legislation to end extended clips. The NRA won't let it happen. I'm not expressing an opinion on it, but extended clips are for sale everywhere. Look on the internet. Look at gun stores. Look at gun shows. Everybody can buy one. It's not exclusive to Melvin Vernell. It's not. But they're trying to make that connection so that they can make it look like it was about this drug deal when in fact Manny Chapayev was not going to go down because of that guy. And his trial was coming up. And his lawyer couldn't help him. Melvin wasn't going to play ball. And he had no reason to. And now he's dead. But back to Grizz's story. Grizz says, on the 6th and the 7th, we all got to, well, the 6th, we all got together and went over to Calvin Johnson's house. Me, Red, Connor, Washington, and Calvin, and talked about what we were going to do. Hold that thought. Calvin Johnson gets on the stand and does a 180 from his statement. Now remember his statement where he said, I never drove him anywhere. And they tried to make a big deal of this. You're not saying you didn't do it. You're saying you don't remember. Every question that was asked of him, listen to the recording, was, do you remember driving him here? Do you remember saying this? Do you remember doing that? And the answers are all no. I don't remember that. If the question had been asked, did you do it? The answer would have been, no, I didn't do it. But either way, when he came in here and talked to you people after having the script, I like what Mr. Shard called it, and he did have it from Sunday to the day he testified, not to mention having it in his head from when J.T. Williams told him. Listen to it. There's not a lot of conversation by Calvin Johnson in the entire recording. I don't remember. And the whole time, J.T. Williams is telling him what Grizz says. And Calvin Johnson, it was cool, he answered the question on the stand and said, so you know that what you have to say, the truth you have to tell is what Grizz said, right? And he said, yes. But the details aren't in the transcript. The details aren't there. So when they said to him, hey, did everybody come to your place? Well, everybody, I don't know what you mean. In the morning, I always work out with Grizz. And then Red showed up on the 6th. We had lunch, and then we were together the rest of the day. We were together the rest of the day. Same thing on the 7th. We were together the rest of the day. If anybody was curious as to what our phone information was about, the plotting that Mr. Middlestat did, the same plotting that the FBI guy did in Ohio, and the same plotting that this guy did in Ms. Ross's office last night, just because it was more convenient, was they plotted the longitude and latitudes. But at the end of the day, they weren't together all day, according to, as Calvin Johnson told you. And Calvin Johnson said, contrary to what Grizz said, that those other two guys were never in my place. I never talked to them. I never even saw them, couldn't tell you who they were till I went to pick them up in Smyrna. That's what Grizz said. So it's a complete opposite story. Who's telling the truth? Neither one of them. You can't believe either one of them. And if you only believe one of them, the uncorroborated testimony of a co-defendant is not enough to convict. Your verdict is not guilty. And there are no phone records to corroborate that Gary Bradford was in any of these places. In fact, there are no phone records to corroborate that anyone involved in this case was in Alpharetta. Zero. And that's not the blood sign I'm saying. There's nobody. Nobody said it, although Calvin Johnson told you that we drove up to Alpharetta and drove in a neighborhood. Nobody, not the prolific texter, hundreds and hundreds of texts, not the phone callers, neither one of Grizz's calls, not Connor's phone, nothing. Puts him in Alpharetta, that's a lie. The story that the Sensei White tells you is he went by himself to see Manny Chapayev, whose office is 2 miles above the hotel that we're talking about and likely bouncing off the same tower as all those other phones in that area. But at the end of the day, he said, you got to help me track the car. Well, that's what he testified to, but Manny's probably saying, let's figure out where that guy is so we can take care of him. But in any event, there was a laugh. Ha! You won't believe it. He's 2 miles from here, right down at the hotel. So they